Hey students, so this was not the plan for today. I was planning on being in class, but I got diagnosed with strep yesterday, and so I was told by my doctor that I definitely should not come to school. Um, Today because I would be highly contagious. So that's why I'm not there. And it is not an ideal day because we do need to get through talking about DBQ stuff. But you know what? We can do this together and we will be fine. On Thursday, I will be here. Doctor cleared me for Thursday. So if you are still planning on turning something in for third quarter, you have until 2:30 to get that completed. So again, I'm sorry I'm not there right now, but there's really not much I can do about that at the moment. So if you would like to get out your PowerPoint from last time, the DBQ PowerPoint, and if you by chance weren't here last class period, I left a few copies on the table in the front of the classroom so that you can pick those up along with the sample DBQ that I gave out last time so that you'd be able to use that because we started using that last class period to help us process through kind of what a DBQ is. So again, if you weren't here last time, you will need to pick those things up from that front table. And if you were here last time, you do need to have out your PowerPoint and have out that sample DBQ that we were working with, the one about the impacts, various approaches to impacts on the working class. So we went over this last time. We went over the schedule for the AP exam, and we started talking about the DBQ and what it is and what ways it's similar to the LEQ and what ways it's different. And then we were able to get to the first 2 points. So the DBQ has a 7-point rubric to it. And the first 2 points are much like the LEQ in your introductory paragraph. So you have the contextualization is worth 1 point, the thesis is worth 1 point. And so the skill here is the same. If you master the skill for the LEQ, if you can do it for the LEQ, you should be able to do it for the DBQ. Now, I'm making that sound like it's something that's very easy. And contextualization and thesis statements are not really the easiest things to just come up with. But the more you practice, and by doing LEQs and DBQs, you're practicing these skills. So really focus on that with your writing. So again, we use the sample DBQ that you should have that's analyzed various arguments that emerged over the course of the 19th century about how to improve the lives of European workers. And so that's we're going to continue working with those documents. So that's why you really do need to have those out and have this DBQ available. So we did a sample contextualization. We understand that this DBQ is asking about the time period of the Industrial Revolution, and we looked at this first sample. There were many factors that led to the development of the Industrial Revolution in Europe, and we decided as a class that that just wasn't specific enough. It wasn't developed enough. It wasn't leading to the answer of the prompt. It really gave us no idea that this was going to be about workers. And so it doesn't work. And then we read the second one. Prior to the 19th century, most people in Europe were peasant farmers, but the beginning of the Industrial Revolution changed work patterns for many Europeans. People began to move to the industrial cities and work in the factory system. As a result of this, a new working class developed. And so this really does give us that background and then also leads us into this essay is going to be about the working classes. And then we had the sample thesis. During the Industrial Revolution, there was much debate over how to improve the lives of workers. Bless this person's heart. It does look like they're trying to have a thesis, but it's just not enough. They're basically restating the question, making it an answer, and that doesn't work for a thesis. The readers are going to see right through that. So a better thesis is demands for better living and working conditions were supported by socialist ideas that advocated for government reform. However, some of the more radical reformers encouraged social revolution to promote change. There were also those who advocated liberal policies, which did not support any government involvement in creating reforms that would affect the working class. And then we talked about why this thesis does work. And I just realized I don't have those documents right in front of me, so I'm going to hurry and pick them up, and I will be right back. Okay, so this thesis does set up our essay because, like we talked about last class period, it tells you exactly what the three body paragraphs are going to be about. We're going to have a body paragraph that talks about these socialist ideas, where they said government needs to intervene and reform. We have radical reformers who wanted social revolution, like massive change, what would be considered radical change. And then we had some of these liberal reformers that are just like, don't change anything. The government doesn't need to intervene. Everything is going to work out. So some of your classes we got through connecting which documents with which, but for those of you that we didn't, I do want to go through that. So our first paragraph that's going to make the argument that there were socialists who wanted the government to intervene. The documents that would be used in that paragraph that we would group together are documents 3 and 5. So 3 and 5, so you've got the London Working Men's Association and Louis Blanc. Both of them are talking about the need for government reforms. And we know that socialists advocate for working class people to be able to vote, so that those reforms can happen. And then we have the next body paragraph. We're going to group the radical reformers, who are considered the radical reformers, and that's going to be documents 4 and 6. You have Karl Marx and Frederick Engels are talking about having a revolution, a communist revolution, which communism is again considered to be the most radical form of socialism. So they're looking at that as a possible solution to the plight of workers. And then you have document 6, which is Pauline Roland, and we look at hers and I think for us, it doesn't look that radical. Like she's just basically saying women have rights too and should be recognized. But in this period, in the 19th century, that would have been a very radical idea. And she's advocating for a major social revolution and seeing women as equal. And so again, 4 and 6 would go best in that category, or the argument that some wanted radical reforms. And then the last argument, the liberal non-reformers, because they didn't want any reforms, we would have documents 1, Thomas Malthus, 2, David Ricardo, and 7, John Stuart Mill. So if you look at all three of them are saying, we really don't need all of these things, all of these changes and government interventions, and so let's just keep things the same. So again, a good thesis is going to set the reader up right from the get-go of knowing exactly where the essay is going to go. Let's look at the next 3 points. So describing the content of at least 3 documents to address the topic of the prompt. This is the really most basic use of the documents. It is, can you read a document and describe what it means? And a lot of times the students that just do this, I see them say in document 1 it says this, in document 2 it says this, in document 3 it says this. And that may very well get you this point, but we want more than that. So this is, but I do want to clarify, this is explaining the document. It is not merely quoting. You're not being tested on your ability to be able to use quotation marks in the right way. In fact, don't quote at all. It's really just a waste of time. As a reader, we basically ignore quotations. We've already read the document. We know what the document says. We're seeing if you know what the document says. And you quoting the document doesn't prove to us that you know what the document says. You can use documents more than once. So if there was a document that you saw that that worked in multiple categories, that could benefit you in the last point, which is complexity, showing that you understand some of the nuances, that some of these documents don't just fit in one grouping or in one area. And then when you use a document, you'll want to cite it, but you can be very simple of just doing like, you've explained what document 1 means, and Thomas Malthus said this and believed that, that there didn't need to be any government reform, that things would just work out. And then after you write that sentence, you put D1 to make it really easy for the reader to give you credit for using that document. And today you're going to be looking at a sample DBQ, and in that sample DBQ, you'll notice that every time they've used a document and explained a document, they'll put in parentheses the document numbers to, again, make it easiest as possible on the reader. The next point is supports an argument in a response to the prompt using at least 4 documents. So this is where we go next level. It's more than just explaining, or more than just describing, excuse me, it's explaining how that document answers the question, how it supports the prompt. How is it? It's not that you just need to know what Louis Blanc is saying in document 5. It's that you need to explain that what he is saying supports this idea that socialists wanted reforms to benefit the lives of workers. So it's making a connection back to your thesis and to the argument that you're making in that body paragraph with the documents that you're using in the paragraph. So again, this is more than simply explaining. This is analysis. You have to start to form an argument. And so your body paragraphs, whether you have 2 or 3 body paragraphs, but each of those body paragraphs should be relaying some kind of argument, and you have already chosen which documents you are going to use. You're going to explain those documents, describe them, explain how they answer the question or how they address the prompt. And then the last one is explaining how or why the document's historical situation, intended audience, and or point of view is relevant to the argument, using at least 2 documents. So you notice with all of these, there is a requirement of how many documents. None of them require that you use all 7, but if you use all 7 and you use them effectively, that can get you that final 7th complexity point. So that makes that doable. And I think for example, this essay that we've been working with in class, I think using all of the documents was something that all of us should easily have been able to do. They were easy to fit into categories and be able to make them into arguments. So if you can use all 7 documents, you really want to use all 7. So with this last point in using the documents, in 2 documents, you want to go above and beyond just analysis. You want to look beyond just what the document is saying and how it relates to the argument. You're exploring different ideas around that document. It's what I call HIP. So you've got historical situation, intended audience, and point of view. And so you're doing this with 2 documents. You can use the same HIP for both documents, or you can use different ones. What I actually want you to do is try to do this at least 3 times, because a lot of times students think that they're doing this, but they're really not. And so if you do it extra, if you do it more than required, then that gives you a little bit of a cushion room in case maybe the reader doesn't agree with you that one of your attempts at HIP worked. So I would say at least try to do 3 or 4 of these just to give yourself a little bit of that cushion room. So let's look at some examples of what HIP is. Oh, not that HIP, silly. We're not talking about those HIPs. HIPs don't lie. Let's talk about the first possibility. So this is one option you have. Historical situation is really contextualization. And believe me when I say I'm doing the hand gesture contextualization right now as I say it. But historical situation is that contextualization, but it's just of that individual document. So when you're writing the essay, you'll do contextualization for the entire essay. This one is just doing it for that document. What things led up to the creation of that document? What is evidence that we have that help contribute to the ideas that are in that document and why it was produced? This has to be more than a date. You can't just say this document was created in 1845 and that's why it's saying what it's saying. Like, that's way too vague. Look at when the document was produced and think about what's happening during that time in the place that it's being produced, and think if you can and notice if you can think back to what came before that, what took place before that document was written. Is there any historical trend or process that fits with that document that led to the development of that document? For example, if we use document 4 with Karl Marx, if you were able to describe, okay, in throughout Europe, as we're increasingly industrializing, workers are getting taken advantage of more and more, and Karl Marx is responding to that by advocating a solution, which in his case is, of course, a violent upheaval and revolution. But you're taking that, again, that information, going back and kind of building up to whatever the document is saying. A way that you can start a sentence or a phrase that you can use to make it very clear to the reader that you're trying to do historical context is saying the historical context of this document is, and just flat out, the historical context is that before this document was created, these are the things that were going on in Europe, and being very explicit. So here's an example. Again, we're using the DBQ that you are looking at right now. The 19th century was a time of massive population growth, industrialization, and urbanization, which were all factors that contributed to increased issues with poverty, especially industrialized cities. In response to these changes, Malthus, who is a classic economist, supports liberal laissez-faire capitalism to combat the issues of poverty. He does not believe that it should be an obligation of the wealthy to provide for the poor. And then you can see those parentheses, document 1, letting the reader know which document. So what you're seeing here is this is contextualization, historical context, and then that second part with the bullet point, this is the analysis of the document. So this is showing the reader you understand what this document is saying, what Malthus is saying, and you're connecting it to an argument because you're making this argument that Malthus, among other liberals at the time, did not believe that any reforms were necessary. And so that would be part of that third paragraph where you're arguing liberals don't want to reform. But you can see how it's contextualizing, you're building up to that point and then explaining and analyzing what that document says. The next option you have is intended audience. Who's meant to see, read, and or hear the message of this document? If the source tells you who the audience is, then don't use that one for intended audience. For example, in document 3, it says that it is a petition to Parliament. If you write, document 3 is a petition to Parliament, it's meant to be heard by Parliament, that's not going to fly. That's too easy. That's too low bar for AP. So you're looking at documents where it doesn't explicitly tell you exactly which document or which group it's being written to, and you're kind of guessing. Who do you think? And it can't be vague. Something like, this document was meant for everyone. This document was meant for all of the people in Britain. Like, you have to try to get pretty specific and then explain why you think that would be the intended audience without saying you think. Because remember, we're not using personal pronouns. So an example of a phrase that you could use is the author's intended audience was fill in the blank. And this is illustrated by, or can be determined by, so that second part is where you're explaining, this is how I might know it. Do you know it for sure? No, probably not. But you are making an educated guess as to who this document might be written for or to. You must have that second part of the statement. You start out with, this is the intended audience, but then you need to explain why they would be the intended audience. So let's look at an example. Louis Blanc is likely writing this to government officials. If we left it at that, no go, not going to count. too vague. But then if he goes on to explain whom he hopes will support his suggestion of increasing government intervention in the economy. That's why we think he's talking to government officials, because he's specifically wanting them to intervene in the economy on the behalf of workers. So that extra explanation is going to be why it would get a point for intended audience. The last option you have is point of view. This is looking at perspective. Everybody has a bias. Everybody has a point of view that is unique. This is really when we ask the question, why? Why are they writing what they're writing? Or why are they saying it the way that they're saying it? So like I said, everybody has a bias. So look at who the author is and why they would be saying what they're saying or the way they're saying about. Think about things like gender, social class, nationality, religion, government position, race. What is something that maybe is unique about them that would give them an interesting perspective that would be different from everyone else? The best way to figure out POV is reading the source information, looking at that source, looking at the person or the group or the organization that wrote it, and then predicting what do you expect would be their motivation, their reason why. So, for example, a way of approaching this is person X, so whoever the author is, believes this because of Z, because of their religion, their background, their job, their nationality, whatever it is. So let's look at an example of this one. Pauline Rowland has a unique point of view because she is a woman. Okay, like we all understand that that's going to be true. I mean, she's the only woman in these documents, and yeah, her point of view is going to be unique because she's a woman. But I think you all know you can't stop there. That's not going to count for POV. You have to add that second part. As opposed to the male socialists who focus primarily on social issues that relate directly to men, particularly full male suffrage, Roland is promoting greater equality for women as well. So there you're getting into, not only is it she has a unique perspective because she's a woman, but as a woman, she is different from all of the other male socialists. She wants different things than the male socialists want. And so that gives the reader more detail, more understanding of the unique perspective that you're trying to display. So again, I'm just going to quickly go back to this point. Back on here. So this explains the how or why in at least 2 documents. So 2 documents, again, I prefer you do 3 or 4 documents. You need to either do historical situation, intended audience, or point of view. You just have to choose one of them. You don't have to do all 3 of them. You can do historical situation on all of your explaining, sourcing. You could do all point of view. You could do one of each, as long as you do it on at least 2 documents. But again, prefer 3 or 4. As long as you do that, you will get the point. So it doesn't matter which ones you choose. Choose the easiest ones. Choose the ones that come most naturally to you. For me, I like point of view. It's the one that I find the easiest to do. The next point, so we're getting to the last points. The next point is additional historical evidence. This is the one time in the DBQ that you are not given anything to help you. The rest of the essay, you should be able to pull from the documents, pull your knowledge. The documents are there to help you. This is one piece of historical evidence that is nowhere in the document. So it can't be something that's alluded to, that's mentioned. It can't be there at all. And it can't be part of your contextualization. You can't double dip. So you either get a point for contextualization or you get the point for historical evidence. If they're coming down to that. So historical evidence is something I don't want to see in the introduction, because then I'm going to assume it's contextualization. It's something I want to see somewhere else in the body of the essay or one of the body paragraphs. So make sure you make it pretty explicit, something that is obvious, something that is not in the documents. Bring up a person that's not one of the authors of the document. Bring up an event that's not one of the events discussed in the documents, but make sure it's relevant. Don't just bring up something out of the blue that doesn't fit into what the essay is about. But this is something that you have to explicitly do somewhere in the essay. And again, if you're thinking, oh, my contextualization will also count as historical evidence, I'm telling you right now, it won't. It will not. Last but not least, we have the complex understanding. And so I mentioned that this was a point that we as AP teachers used to say it's a unicorn point. It's pretty much impossible for our students to get. It's so difficult. Only 2% of students on the AP test get it. Because it is so much more difficult and requires much more complex essay. But as of this year, as of the 2023-2024 school year, the people who make the AP exam have decided to reduce the requirements on the complex understanding, making it something that's a lot more doable, a lot more achievable. So some things that you could do to possibly get this point, maybe coming up with multiple themes or perspectives, and something beyond just what's in the documents. If it's a document that is just asking about cause or just asking about effect, if you do both of those things, you might get this point. If it's a document or if it's a DBQ asking about just similarities or just differences, and you do both, that could give you a point. If it's a document just asking you about what things are staying the same, continuity, or one that's asking about what changes are happening, and you do both, then that could get you this extra point. Making relevant connections to other time periods or geographic areas. If you can connect whatever the content of the DBQ is about to some other period in history, to another place at that same time, then that could get you the extra point. Effectively using all 7 documents. So that was one that I had mentioned before. If you're using all 7 documents and you're using them well, possibly sets you up for that extra point. And if you do HIP 4 times, so if you do HIP, so the requirement is 2, but if you get credit for doing HIP 4 times, then you could possibly get that complexity point. So these are a little bit more doable. It's not just like, oh, you have to wow and be spectacular, and we don't really know what that means because each reader gets to decide what's spectacular. Here are some very specific things that you can do to try to get that 7th point. The last thing is using extensive evidence beyond the documents. So if you do more than just that one piece of evidence beyond the documents, if you do multiple pieces of evidence that aren't anywhere in the documents, you can potentially get that point. Really, this is a points game. The rubric is 7. If you'd like to shoot for getting a 4 out of 7, I think a 4 is a great score. If you are solid on your multiple choice, if you are solid on your SAQs and your LEQ, then getting a 4. Obviously, I'd like you to get more than that. Obviously, you would like to get more than that. You know, I'm not trying to encourage you to necessarily just go for the minimum, but what I am telling you is DBQs aren't easy. And they can be very stressful when you're doing it under time conditions. So you now know what the expectations are. And like, if you can get a 4 and you've done all right on everything else, you're still setting yourself up to pass the AP exam. Would I love a 5, 6, 7? Are we shooting for a 5, 6, 7? Absolutely. But a 4 is a solid. And remember, 2 of those points come out of the introductory. So 2 of those 4 points that you can get are coming from the contextualization and thesis. Again, I think that's a very doable thing for all of you to be able to complete. So that's what we have for the DBQ. Again, I know that it would have been better if I had been in class today and I could interact with you and I could answer your questions. I'm more than happy to do that when I get back. But as far as right now goes, that at least gives you the basics of it. Some other things. So for the rest of class today, now that you've finished this, for the rest of class today, what I would like you to do is go over the sample DBQ of improving the lives of workers. So you should have picked this up as you were coming into class today. And on the back, it gives you the highlighting rules. So I want you, if you can find contextualization, I want you to highlight that in yellow. If you can find a thesis statement, I want you to highlight that in green. If you can find that document analysis, that supporting the documents, actually not just describing the documents, but explaining how the documents are actually answering the question or addressing the prompt and creating an argument, highlight that in blue. If you can find HIP, historical context, intended audience, or point of view associated with the documents, highlight that in pink. And then if you find outside information, highlight that in orange. So I want you to go through this document, the sample DBQ, Improving the Lives of Workers, and I want you to go through and highlight each of those areas. Then when you're done with that, I would like you to look at it's called the European History Document-Based Question. It was a little packet that you also should have picked up at the beginning of class today. So on Friday, I already told you I wasn't going to be at school on Friday. On Friday, you are going to be getting into Class Companion, and you are going to be writing this DBQ. And I am just asking you to do your best. You've seen a sample, you've gotten an idea about how DBQs work, how you're supposed to write them. I want you to just try. It's going to be these documents that you're going to use. So since you only have 50 minutes in class on Friday, and probably even less time than that, because the sub's going to need to, get you all ready and do roll and all of that stuff, and do the announcements for class. So you might only end up having 40 minutes. You need to be prepared before that. So I want you to read all these documents, analyze them. You can write all over this paper, figure out which documents you can group together, how you're going to form paragraphs. Maybe you can start to figure out what your thesis and contextualization will be. And then on Friday, you're going to actually write it in Class Companion. You're going to try writing a DBQ essay. And of course, it'll give you some feedback. It'll tell you, like Class Companion does, you're used to this. It'll give you some ideas of ways that you can improve. When I get back, we can talk about the DBQ. But right now, this is just, this is your first time trying it. So you're just going to go into it trying to do your best using these documents. So make sure you bring this with you. Make sure you bring your Chromebook with you on Friday, because you're going to be typing up that essay. Again, make sure you have these documents with you so that you can reference back to them. Again, you should have read them before Friday, so make sure you read through all of them. You should have time in class today to be able to read through all of them. I will be here tomorrow. The doctor has given me the green light that I just need to have 1 day of antibiotics to make sure that I'm not contagious. And then on Thursday, I will be here. So if you are submitting anything on Thursday, I will be available. If you're having to take I know a few people still haven't done the World War I Russian Revolution test. You can come in before school, or you can come in after school on Thursday. Those are the final times that you will be able to get that done. So make sure you plan that out if that applies to you. And if you get done with everything I've assigned you today, then maybe work on chapter notes. You have the textbooks are in here. They're underneath the French Revolution Cemetery. So they're over in that bookshelf. Also, I do want to point out, I have already published the rest of the notes for the year. So you've got chapter 26, 27, 28, and then chapters 29 and 30 are together. Whether you're doing Cornell notes or reading guides, it's not that I'm telling you you have to do a bunch of homework over spring break, but for those of you who maybe want to get ahead on stuff and have more time to focus on reviewing before the AP test and have less stress trying to get those notes done as well, I wanted to make sure that they were available to you so that you could be working on them. So those are the things that are available. You should be working on something the entire class period. And so please be doing that. And since I won't see you on Friday, I guess I will have to tell you now, I am feeling very generous. So take next week off, the whole week. I will see you. Let's see. The next time I will see you is on April 2nd. Miss you guys. See ya after spring break.